Hello everybody and welcome to What's in the Box. In this one, I'm returning to the Great War and we're going to be looking at, I have to make sure I say this right, Clavery's Chargers. There we go. I think I got that right. Probably didn't. This is the French army deal for Great War. And as you can see under close, we'll do a very quick shot here. We get a lot of infantry in this box and a lot of support units. We get, compared to the British one I did last time, we get a bigger rifle platoon, and we get 2 of those in this one. Again, like in the British box, we get 3 armoured vehicles that we'll talk about in a minute, but let's get a closer look at some of these units. First up, we have our artillery. We only have one major piece of artillery, one towed gun in this box as compared to the British where we have 2. This is another sort of 75mm gun. Very common caliber in World War I because it's a sort of light field artillery. It's none of the bigger stuff that you see in a lot of the old wartime footage. So we get one of those with its crew and limber. Moving further across, we have our machine gun platoon. This is consisting of 4 stands with 4 machine guns. Nice heavy machine guns. I don't know the type, but I believe they're the ones that are fed with a small, not a belt, but a small tray of rounds that slides laterally through the gun. Someone can tell me in the comments what that is exactly because I'm not up on my machine guns. So let's move on. From our machine guns, we have our trench mortars. We have 2 of those, looking very nice indeed. We have that big sort of ground plate with the sort of petard sat on top of the tube. And these were meant to be fired from within a trench, so they had minimal backblast, minimal disruption to everyone around them. Short range, sort of lob a lump of high explosive over the top, across no man's land into the enemy trench if they were good enough at aiming it. Next we have our rifle platoon. This one in particular has a little bit of a difference to the other one, whereas it removes one of the teams and replaces it with this 37mm gun. We have our command group and we have all our riflemen and so on back there. So quite a large platoon, and with 2 of those you have quite a lot of infantry on the table. Next we have our command element, which is a single base of 3 miniatures, and we have a sniper team here that can be used separately on top of that. But that's enough of the infantry. Let's have a look at our vehicles. First up we have the White AM armoured car. I believe the White AM, White being the motor company that made it. I think it's an American import or White built locally in France. I'm not too sure. It has a small cannon and a machine gun in a fully rotating turret, which makes me wonder how awkward was this thing to use, because I know at the time Rolls-Royce were making armoured cars as well, and they had slightly different ideas on how to form, how to build, and how to use armoured cars. I think they had a bit more experience with building them than certain other companies, and I think it mostly tells in the armament and the layout of that armament. So that cannon to the front is fine, but the machine gun to the rear, I don't know. I don't think you're really going to be... I don't think this has seen a lot of use because it's probably not the best armoured car around. And with a lot of the warfare turning to trenches, you found that road networks and stuff were either ploughed up or just mainly reserved to the back line. So you didn't really see a lot of this kind of stuff being used. However, let's move on to our tracked vehicles. This is the Schneider CA or C1. I think it's the CA1 or C1. Pretty much just a armoured box on top of a tractor. That is essentially what the Schneider is. It's not very special. It doesn't have a great reputation because of the shape of the vehicle. The length of the vehicle allowed it to get stuck in the likes of no man's land or any heavily cratered terrain, particularly in very muddy terrain as well. French tanks, bar the FT-17, which we're going to see in another unboxing, really didn't perform as well as the likes of the British designs, but the FT was definitely the exception there, and it was a step in the right direction. This, however, wasn't really a step in any direction other than getting something armoured out on the field. However, we can talk a little bit more about the next one. This monstrosity, because it is a monstrosity, this is the Saint-Chamond. This is another tractor on tracks with a big armoured box on the top. A lot of problems with this vehicle. It does, however, carry a big gun. I think we have a 75mm in there, and it's quite a long, I think it's basically the field gun that you get in the box mounted into the tank with a couple of machine guns, about 4 machine guns in support. So the difference between this and the British tanks is that the British tanks had an idea in their mind with the sponsons that they'd mounted on the vehicle, A, to allow that unditching beam to move across, and the whole point of the rhomboid shape for the British tanks was to allow them to do that, as well as elongate the hull so they could cross trenches more easily. The French, on the other hand, particularly with the Saint-Chamond, sort of wanted a more direct fire support. It certainly looks like a more direct fire support vehicle than the British would be. The other difference really is the implementation of it. This tank is going to sit back and fire direct at stuff. It's going to fire at machine gun positions, it's going to fire at bunkers and that sort of thing. Whereas the British tanks could do that, certainly, but they couldn't shoot direct to the front. If something was immediately in front of the tank, they couldn't do that. The idea with the British tanks was that you half crossed the trench, you straddled the trench with your tank, and then you fired with your sponsons down either side. And you can see that on the Saint-Chamond when it has these machine guns on either side of it. As it's crossing a trench, it's able to fire down into those trenches. However, it really is more a direct fire support vehicle. Again, not very successful. The length of hull that overhangs either end of the track made this tank notorious for getting stuck in craters or getting stuck in mud. It would nose down into something and that would be that. If it fell down into a trench, that tank is now stuck. It's unable to pull itself back out again. What is interesting about the vehicle, and I've seen the, currently I believe the only running one in the world, I've seen it running at Bovington Tank Museum, the French museum, Musée des Blindés, have a running example of this, and they've had to modify it a little bit with a few bits of modern technology, but it is essentially the original vehicle, and it's a petrol-electric drive. So if people are saying, oh, hybrids are the way to go, well, hybrids started way before all your fancy little Hondas and stuff like that with their hybrid drives. This is a hybrid vehicle, and hearing it drive around was weird because it's an electric motor sound more than the engine, which is kind of odd. But a very unique piece to have as a French player and an unusual vehicle in the history of armoured warfare. So that's more or less it. So with our 3 vehicles that we get, we have a nice little cross-section of some of the more unusual French-used armoured vehicles, bar, again, the FT-17. We will see that later on. However, that's basically it. So let's go back and round out. So the French in World War I really, they were definitely suffering far more than most of the other nations at the time with that transition between that sort of Napoleonic kind of style, bright uniforms and cavalry and all that sort of stuff. They really struggled to change, to accept that transition from mobile, rapid warfare to more static, grueling, attritional kind of combat that World War I kind of spawned. And that's not to blame them. That is more a sign of the times where another nation comes in with new tactics. Those tactics are, or don't have a counter immediately, so they start to rapidly prototype and rapidly implement stuff. I think the biggest change for the French army really was getting rid of their red trousers, getting rid of that final little piece of bright uniform and adopting that more sort of blue-grey that they had towards the middle and end of the war. It's an unusual place with the French army because the French army did a lot of the fighting, but they also had all sorts of political upheaval and really trying to toss out the idea of nobles being generals, nobles being in charge of the army. World War I really does typify the common soldier with all the stories and poetry and everything that comes out of the First World War. You really get that more sort of just a guy in a uniform with a rifle sort of experience. And a lot of that was very politically driven, sort of, look at what you're making us do, look what you're making the common man do in the face of all this adversity, and you want to sit in a nice little mansion somewhere and sip champagne while you push pieces across a board. It's a bit memed on. I think the French army in general is a bit memed on, but it's still a fascinating story to see how the French army goes from what they're used to And then meeting stuff like machine guns and aircraft and all this, and having to rapidly put together a force that would be cohesive enough to actually achieve what the French army needed it to do. In other words, don't let France fall, because that was the threat. And I think overall the French army probably performed on par with a lot of its counterparts. The German army, yeah, initially, it's a story told in World War II as well. The German army initially does very well, and by the time people have figured out counters for it, it hasn't quite achieved what it wanted to do. And then in World War I cases, it's a complete stalemate and just sits there. There's bits and bobs moving on the front. You have the Somme, you have all the other large battles, Passchendaele and that sort of thing, and it just and Verdun. It's just a war of education for the militaries, but it's at the same time, because it's a war of education for the militaries, it's a war of utter devastation for the common soldier, and that's where we get a lot of our compassion for the First World War, through all that writing and through all the journalism that was done at the time. Serious stuff aside, let me know what you think. Is this an army that's worth playing? Is this about the 100 points? I've been told they're all the army lists I was handed for these unboxings was sort of similar. But let me know in the comments what you think. And if you're interested in learning more about the First World War, there is a plethora of documentaries out there. There is tons and tons of YouTube channels out there that dedicate themselves to actually trying to teach you something and give you like broad brush or wide perspective of what was happening and how it started and how it ended and all that sort of stuff. So I do recommend, if you've got a little bit of an itch for some Great War, go and check all that stuff out. There'll be plenty of it out there for you. I don't know many of them personally. I know most of the World War II channels. You can tell where I mostly lay my interest. But let me know in the comments what you think of this army. Is it a good one to play? Is it fun to play for anyone that does play it already? And yeah, until then, take care, stay safe, and see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.